Good morning. It's another start of a fresh week on this Monday, July 23rd. Coming to you live from Seoul, I'm Shin Se-min, and these are the stories we're following at this hour. Killer weather conditions will continue to grip the nation this week, with the high in Seoul set to top 35 degrees Celsius again today. It's so hot, the number of people that have died from the heat rose to 10 as of this past weekend. The world's economic policy chiefs on the same page on global trade fears. The IMF chief says if the trade spat worsens, it could dampen global growth by 0.5%. And in the U.S., President Trump claims a previously classified cache of documents released by the FBI are the proof his campaign was illegally spied upon during the 2016 presidential election. The scorching heat wave continues to grip us here in South Korea, with temperatures hovering between the mid-30s to near 40 degrees Celsius range in most places. Now, the searing heat has killed 10 people this summer alone, double the amount recorded this time last year. In addition, the number of people with heat-related illnesses had easily surpassed 1,500 as of this past Saturday. Korea Center for Disease Control and Prevention is advising people to stay hydrated, especially the old and the young who are more prone to heat-related illnesses, adding they should refrain from outdoor activities when temperatures are at their highest from noon to 3 p.m. And as a safety precaution for all, in the case of an emergency, if an individual loses consciousness due to the heat, make sure to call 119 right away. And while you wait for an ambulance, do not attempt to give water to an unconscious patient, as it could cause them to suffocate. Valuable negotiations to ensure the ongoing North Korea-U.S. denuclearization talks and efforts to improve inter-Korean relations will achieve success in a relatively speedy manner. Now, that's how President Moon Jae-in's national security advisor described his meetings with U.S. officials as he returned home from Washington on Sunday. Now, Chung Eui-yong said he was able to reaffirm the common goal of establishing peace on the Korean peninsula through complete denuclearization, as well as their resolve to maintain close coordination and share related information based on strong South Korea-U.S. alliance. Chung, however, said he did not discuss the UN report on the reported arrival of North Korean coal shipments to South Korea. The U.S. State Department says South Korea is complying with all UN Security Council resolutions, adding the two allies are in constant communication in regards to North Korean coal that arrived in the South via Russia. In an interview with Seoul-based Yonhap News Agency on Sunday, a State Department official noted that South Korea is one of their closest allies, and the South can be trusted with maritime implementation. The South Korean government is currently investigating 9,000 tons of coal believed to be of North Korean origin that arrived last October via Russia. The commander of U.S. forces in South Korea says North Korea's level of provocation towards the U.S. changed months before President Trump's summit in Singapore with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. In a video link interviewed at the ASEAN Security Forum over the weekend, General Vincent Brooks says they saw a big change occur after the November 29, 2017 missile launch, noting that the North have gone now 235 days without a single provocation. Brooks also added the challenge now is to continue to make progress with North Korea, adding the current level of diplomacy is like tulips blooming in the spring. The ongoing sports diplomacy between the two Koreas has bagged the peninsula yet another title. A joint table tennis team from the Koreas won the mixed doubles at the 2018 Korea Open over the weekend, the first gold in just the latest round of sporting exchanges between both South and North. And the chief of the International Table Tennis Organization is already looking ahead at the two Koreas working as one as the 2020 World Championships in Busan. Our Won Jung-hwan tells us more.
South Korean table tennis player Jang Woo-jin had himself quite a weekend, becoming the first ever triple champion at the Korea Open in Daejeon, a central city some 160 kilometers south of Seoul. Before the men's singles final against Liang Jingkun of China, Jang had already basked in gold medal glory in the mixed doubles with North Korean player Cha Yo-shim and in the men's doubles with Im Jong-hun. Of his 3 gold medals, Jang said the mixed doubles title with Cha meant the most to him, explaining it was a once-in-a-lifetime gold medal that will go down in history. The united Korean pair overcame all odds to be crowned mixed doubles champions on Saturday, making the Korea's first combined title in international table tennis since they won the women's team gold at the 1991 World Championships in Japan. The unification of 4 Korean teams was part of the tournament's ping-pong diplomacy program to support solidarity through table tennis, following the recent basketball diplomacy that helped expand sports exchanges earlier this month. But the unified team's gold medal-winning performance serves as a massive boost for the 2 countries' preparations ahead of the upcoming inter-Korean sporting exchanges at the 2018 Asian Games in August. South and North Korea have agreed to field joint teams in 3 sports, including women's basketball, dragon boat racing, and rowing in Jakarta. Meanwhile, the head of the Global Table Tennis Organization expressed on Sunday his long-term plans for unified Korean teams, saying he will help them pair up to play at the World Tours in Austria and Sweden, with an aim for the teams to qualify for the 2018 World Tour Grand Finals in December. He even mentioned the possibility of forming a joint team at the upcoming World Championships and the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. The 16 North Korean players, who between them won 2 golds and 2 bronze in Daejeon, will return to North Korea on Monday. 원정환, Arirang News.
The demilitarized zone has separated the 2 Koreas along the 38th parallel for several decades now. However, amid the thawing relations between the 2 Koreas, the DMZ has garnered attention as a tourist hotspot. And our Kim Hae-sung dropped by the DMZ Museum, where you can also learn all about the DMZ's long history, but also sensed a renewed hope for the peace on the Korean peninsula.
Established in 1953, the demilitarized zone runs across the entire length of the Korean peninsula. The 248-kilometer belt that separates the 2 Koreas has long been an all-too-real symbol of war and division. But just 10 kilometers from the heavily armed border in Gosong County stands the DMZ Museum. Here you can find all kinds of historical records and artwork related to the DMZ, from the outbreak of the Korean War and the signing of the Korean War Armistice Agreement in 1953 to landmines and propaganda leaflets exchanged between the 2 Koreas over the past several decades.
There's also a section showing the records of the fallen soldiers from the Korean War, the family pictures they kept with them, and their unsent letters.
The generation before me experienced the Korean War firsthand. I never did, and it's even harder for my kids' generation to grasp the meaning of the war. With the recent thaw in inter-Korean relations, I wanted to bring my children here and help them understand the history and pain of a divided nation.
The museum says the number of Korean and foreign visitors has jumped 50% between May and June compared to the same period last year, following the Inter-Korean Summit and the North Korea-US Summit in Singapore.
Like the Berlin Wall, which was a product of the Cold War, the DMZ is a legacy of the Korean War. It's of the past, but it exists in the present, and in a way it also extends to the future as its meaning evolves. We hope to capture that change and meaning as the DMZ garners even more attention as a magnet for tourists.
That different meaning can be seen by the flourishing wildlife in the DMZ, which has been a human-free haven and is estimated to be home to over 5,000 different animal and plant species. Pictures of previous inter-Korean business projects like railways that once crossed the DMZ connecting the 2 Koreas show the possibility of closer economic ties. But there is even more to the museum than that. On the 2nd floor stands trees decorated by visitors themselves, a special touch presenting their hopes on the future role of the DMZ. From teenagers to 92-year-old Mr. Liu, who fought in the Korean War, details differ. But broadly, there is renewed hope for peace and a fresh start. Kim Hae-sung, Arirang News.
Civic groups from the two Koreas are to join forces to bring back from Japan the remains of Koreans forced to work under Japan's colonial rule back in early 1900s. South Korean members of Korean Council for Reconciliation and Cooperation met with their North Korean members in Pyongyang last week and signed an agreement to this end. It is believed there are remains of nearly 2,000 Koreans in Japan, and a delegation that visited Pyongyang told reporters on Sunday that the North Korean members were very proactive in keeping and implementing the inter-Korean Panmunjom Declaration. They also hoped they could have conservative South Korean lawmakers participate in expanding inter-Korean civilian exchanges. But according to the South Korean delegation, the North Koreans also said Seoul should be more proactive in expanding cooperation with Pyongyang despite international sanctions. Now, the trade war between the world's two largest economies may now lead to a currency war, as the U.S. Treasury Secretary says Washington will closely review whether the Chinese yuan has been manipulated. Stephen Mnuchin also reiterated that the U.S. could end up imposing tariffs on every single product imported from China. Our Kim Yo-sun tells us more.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin says Washington is monitoring the recent weakness of the Chinese yuan to see whether the currency has been manipulated. According to CNBC, Mnuchin stressed during an interview in Brazil that the U.S. will review very carefully whether Beijing has manipulated the yuan. He explained that such a review is carried out as part of the U.S. Treasury's biannual report on currency manipulation. In April and October each year, the U.S. Treasury releases a list of countries whose currency practices need monitoring and designates countries as currency manipulators. Pundits say the U.S. may label China as a currency manipulator in its report released in October, following the Trump administration's additional tariffs imposed on goods imported from the country. Mnuchin also threatened China, saying President Trump's earlier comments that he's ready to slap tariffs on every single Chinese good imported to the U.S., which amounts to some $500 billion could become reality. Stating that he thinks Beijing is manipulating its currency during an interview with CNBC last Friday, President Trump warned China that he's ready to take the ultimate step on Chinese imports should the need arise. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
Finance ministers and central bankers from the world's largest economy say heightened trade and geopolitical tensions risk derailing global growth, calling for a greater dialogue in the final communique of the G20 meeting. Our Lee Seung-jae tells us more.
Finance ministers and central bankers from the world's largest economies came together in Buenos Aires, Argentina over the weekend to discuss some of the top issues facing the world economy. Taking the spotlight were the heightened trade and geopolitical tensions. On Sunday, the finance leaders said such tensions risk derailing global growth and called for a greater dialogue in their final communique. The G20 meeting comes amid an escalation in rhetoric in the trade conflict between the U.S. and China, the world's largest economies. The two economic powerhouses have so far slapped tariffs on $34 billion worth of each other's goods. This past Friday, U.S. President Donald Trump raised the stakes with a threat to impose tariffs on all $500 billion of Chinese exports to the U.S. unless Beijing agrees to major structural changes to its technology transfer, industrial subsidies, and joint venture policies. IMF Chief Christine Lagarde warned that trade restrictions will lead to a negative impact on the GDP, which in the worst case under current measure is in the range of 0.5% of GDP on a global basis. However, U.S. Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin said G7 industrial powers were taking seriously his call for them to drop tariffs, non-tariff trade barriers, and subsidies, and added the Trump administration would press these issues in its upcoming meetings with the European Union's top executives. Meanwhile, the communique also noted that although global economic growth was robust and unemployment was at a decade low, growth was becoming less synchronized among major economies, and downside risks over the short and medium term had increased. The ministers reaffirmed their conclusion from G20 leaders at their last summit in Hamburg last July, when they emphasized that trade is an engine of global growth, adding that multilateral trade agreements are important. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Korean researchers have developed a soft, stretchy, skin-like electronic material that can be used to wirelessly send signals to soft robots. Our Park Se-young has more.
Fingers connected to this electronic skin bend and straighten just like real fingers. The e-skin, less than a millimeter thick, receives command signals through its wireless communication chips. The system is based on fully printable, stretchable hybrid electronics that can operate even when the skin is pressed and folded.
We implemented the system using the smallest communication chips and antenna. Since each chip is connected with elastic electrodes, the system operates properly even when its shape is altered.
The light bulb stays on even when the wire is stretched out. After hardening a water-like hydrogel, a layer of rubber was spread thinly to maximize the material's elasticity. Then, silver ink was used to electrify the material for use as a wire.
Currently, it can stretch to 18.8 times its original length. The previous technology could only be stretched to 5 or 6 times its length, so it's a huge improvement.
These stretch materials can be used for both wearable devices and soft robots. Those soft robots, which can be used for exploration and rescue in hard-to-reach areas, are expected to evolve along with the development of this new material. Park Se-young, Arirang News.
And we take things back to the weather conditions gripping the country. Unbearable heat continues to bake South Korea with record-breaking temperatures over the weekend, and it's forecast to be another very hot day. And our weathercaster Lee Ji-hyun is standing by at Yongma Waterfall Park in Jungnam-gu, eastern Seoul for us. Now, Ji-hyun, just looking at the waterfall seems to help us feel a bit cooler, but how are you bearing that steamy temperature?
Hello and good morning, Sam. And well, just looking at the waterfall and listening to the sound of waterfall definitely helps you to feel a bit cooler. And what's more, it's even better when lit up at night. Now, here in Yongma Waterfall Park seems to be a popular destination for people who wants to get away from those tall buildings and massive volume of cars. In fact, about a week ago, long-tailed gull, which is an almost extinct wild animal species of wild goat here in South Korea, was found here at Yongma Waterfall Park, so it's a nature-friendly area as well. Now, about the temperatures and today's weather conditions, it's forecast to be another very sweltering day across much of the country. We'll see temperatures soaring to the mid-30s this afternoon. Yesterday, though, Seoul saw a high of 38 degrees Celsius and 39.3 degrees in the capital's Seoul district. And even at night, we can feel the steamy heat weather stays. Now, today is Taeseo on the solar calendar, meaning big heat. But, you know, we've already seen severe heat for nearly 10 days, and heat wave warnings are in place everywhere except for some parts of Jeju Island. Extremely strong UV rays will continue to be down, and everyone will feel very uncomfortable in the afternoon, even right now, and possibly waking up a couple of times during the night. It makes you very tired as well. Most parts of Korea had a very warm morning, and afternoon highs in Seoul and Chuncheon, Daejeon will be at 35 degrees Celsius this afternoon, which is a couple notches lower than yesterday. And we'll see 37 degrees over in Daegu and Gyeongju this afternoon, which is a couple notches higher than yesterday. Now, we are looking at no sign of heat easing up for the time being, so be sure to stay hydrated and take good care of yourself. And that's all for me at this hour.
A former foreign policy advisor to President Trump's campaign has denied that he ever acted as an agent of the Russian government to undermine the 2016 U.S. presidential election. Carter Page's denial comes after the Trump administration released a surveillance application in which the FBI says it believes Page was collaborating and conspiring with Moscow. Now, for more on this and other news around the world, we turn to our Do Aram at the News Center. So, Aram, yet another twist to the Russia probe.
That's right, Semin. In an interview with CNN on Sunday, Carter Page said that the notion he was ever working as an advisor for Moscow was, quote, over the top and misleading. As part of an investigation into possible collusion between the Kremlin and the Trump campaign, the U.S. government released an application filed by the FBI in October 2016 to put Page under surveillance. The request was granted by a court and also renewed under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. When asked about his 2013 statement in which he referred to himself as an informal advisor to the Kremlin, Page responded that his interactions were consistent of informal conversations of no real meaning. He added the allegations against him were just an attempt to distract from the real crimes shown in what he called the misleading documents. President Trump, meanwhile, seized on the release to claim the warrant application showed his campaign was improperly spied on. However, he provided no evidence to support his assertion. He also accused the Justice Department and the FBI of misleading the courts without elaborating. The DOJ and the FBI did not immediately respond to Trump's allegations. The release of the documents comes just over a week after 12 Russians were charged with hacking Democratic officials in the 2016 election. So far, 32 people have been indicted as part of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's inquiry into possible collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. President Trump has continually labelled the probe as a witch hunt. In other news, Britain's new Brexit minister has warned that the UK could refuse to pay a €43 billion or $51 billion divorce bill to the European Union if it does not get a trade deal. Speaking to the Sunday Telegraph, Dominic Raab said some, quote, conditionality was needed between the UK making an exit payment and its ability to create a new agreement with the EU. Despite the threat, Raab expressed optimism that a deal could be reached by October. Britain leaves the bloc next March. Police in South Africa say gunmen have killed 11 taxi drivers on their way back home from a colleague's funeral. Police said the gunmen ambushed a minibus carrying members of a taxi drivers association on Saturday between the towns of Colenso and Weenen in KwaZulu-Natal province. 2 drivers were said to have escaped without injuries. Officials are tracking down the suspects and are investigating possible motives. There have been cases of deadly violence in South Africa amongst rival cab driver groups vying for the same route. Cuba has a new cabinet 3 months after President Miguel Diaz-Canel took office. The 34-member Council of Ministers, including 9 new appointments, was approved by lawmakers over the weekend. Cuba's National Assembly is now reviewing a draft of the country's new constitution, which admits the aim of building communism, recognizes private property, and opens the door to gay marriage.
That's our time at the hour on Arirang News, but keep it tuned for more news updates coming up at noon Korea time. Thank you for watching and have a great start of your day and the week ahead.